How's all with you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm. It's always a slightly weird place being between albums. So, because the kind of the point at which I finish one, I'm almost instantly thinking about how I'm going to deal with the next one on a practical level. I mean,
Uh,
conceptually, I will have had it quite nailed down for a while, but there's quite a few practicalities that one has to sort out. So
yeah,
I'm starting to focus on that kind of thing now.
I know what you mean. It's like you always play people your new stuff, but you're kind of way ahead of. You're like, oh, but new stuff, your current stuff, you play them, but you're always ahead on the new stuff.
Yeah, I am really because for me, anything as soon as I've finished a project, as soon as it's mastered or up on Bandcamp or wherever, as soon as that happens, I'd really rather not hear it again and just simply concentrate on the next thing.
Right, right. When you listen to, if you do happen to listen to it again, and do you kind of, because I make my own music, but I kind of
Yeah.
hate listening to it because I always hear the mistakes, and that kind of drives me daft. Like,
Yeah, I try and make sure that I'm quite. Although I record quite quickly, kind of the latter stages of an album tend to move a bit slower, and that gives me a lot of time to live with things. And
hmm
I think it is an important part of being able to accept your own work after the fact,
right,
without displeasure, um, and therefore anything that you think's going to bother you, you will hopefully have listened to it enough times before you finally put the thing to bed. And if it turned out that it did bother you, that you expunged it, replaced it, or whatever. So generally, by the time that I finish a project, the thing that's going to hang me up the most is nothing that I've played, because that will all have been vetted to the nth degree. But
yeah,
it's more likely to be the mixing, the mastering, something like that. Something
yeah,
late stage that
yeah.
I was not able to quite nail, but felt like I just had to go with it anyway.
Yeah, mixing's kind of the worst, I think, because you can just be endless. There's an endless possibility you can do, and sometimes you get stuck in that.
Yeah, you can. Mixing is, as you say, a bit of a weird thing. Conceptually, I've always find it really hard to come to terms with the fact that
Mm,
something
mm.
that's been very malleable and plastic for quite a long time is suddenly rigid and fixed, and that does upset me unless I do a mix that I think is really good. That doesn't happen that often. Most of them I think are just going to kind of tolerable, or they just about pass muster. So I'm that's the thing that hangs me up the most, is that I, I hear things in the mix that I feel I didn't quite optimize. But yeah, over the years I've kind of learned to live with that a bit more. It used to be the case that it would take me about 10 years to be able to listen to an album again.
Wow.
Whereas now I'm kind of cool with them from the off, generally. I wouldn't choose to put them on, but if I heard them, I think, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've kind of made peace with some aspects of my creativity in the
Yeah.
last couple of decades.
That's a good place to be though, because it gets hard like listen. You when you play something to someone and you hear something that you don't like, they will not hear it. You could play,
No,
they're like, "What are you talking about?" And they just
I know, but I just don't factor that in. For me, other people's opinions, I'm I don't seek them out, and
that's good though.
I don't particularly. I suppose it's good in a way. It's just a bit bullheaded in a way.
Yeah.
I know what I want this to sound like. If
Yeah.
I can get it to sound close to that, then I'm going to be a happy bunny.
Okay.
And if anyone comes up to me and says they don't like it, I go, "That's tough. I do." And if they go, come up and go, "That sounds great," I go, "Oh, thanks." But it's like not a big deal either way. So it's really, I don't know, I'm I'm really only if I can please myself. That's really the biggest hurdle. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's my benchmark really.
I really liked the new record, Melodic
Thanks.
Apoptosis.
Well,
Did I
actually,
say that right?
before
Did I say that okay?
I think it is pronounced apoptosis because
Okay.
in my head I always thought it was like an equivalent word to like apoxia, where
Right,
you were
right.
kind of like lacking something,
Uh-huh.
the lack of something. But when I heard Stuart McConey pre-announce it on Freak Zone last weekend, and he said melodic apoptosis, I thought, Jesus, Stuart, get your pronunciation together, mate. And I thought, no, maybe he's right. So actually, I went up and looked up the pronunciation in the dictionary and thought, no, he is right. It is apoptosis. So in my head, I've been saying apoptosis, but I'm the one that's wrong. So hats off to Stuart there. I may never be able to come around to calling it apoptosis, but anyway, yeah, that's a digression of which there will be several.
That's good. I really enjoyed it. It was really, it's like I don't know. Is it a concept album, or is there a story to it? Because
Yeah,
it felt like that when I was listening to it, like kind of
yeah. I think
journey.
I felt there is quite a strong narrative to it, and I think I make the point in my blog that it took me as long to actually come up with the titles that it did to actually record it, which is to say 6 months. That's largely because I had 6 months because I couldn't do the strings because I was working. I had to wait for lockdown to subside.
Hmm.
But yeah, I recorded all the songs in the order that they appear. I've kind of got into a bit of a habit of that recently. So it was always, the journey was always kind of written in from the beginning. But it turned out it felt like there was like another journey going on under the surface there, which
Right.
is to say, the idea of some of healing after some traumatic event, which is not ever very specifically spelt out, but you can obviously take your own interpretations of the song titles. But the
Hmm.
start point and the end point is pretty fixed, um, uh, and the kind of the parabola in between that you can kind of fill in to some extent based on the song titles, but there's a little bit, they're a bit more blurry. But the kind of the pain of the beginning and the kind of the resolution at the end, I think are reasonably fixed points.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think the production on it is lovely. I love that drum that's kind of the drum sound that's slightly changing throughout the album, but has that kind of constant thing about it. It works really well.
Yeah, I got in I kind of worked out what kit would probably provide the sound for that, and I had a slightly weird. I always knew how I was going to set up the toms because it's all toms with soft felt beaters
Yeah.
throughout the album. Obviously, the tuning changed slightly as we went along, so the
Hmm.
drum sound does change a bit as it goes through the album. But yeah, it's a good sound, but it was. I mean, I'd conceived it like that from way back, so I was quite chuffed that I managed to get it quite close to how it was in my head.
That's always a good thing.
Yeah.
Are you playing like the vibraphone and the melodica and everything else apart from like the strings and?
Yeah, it's much easier for me to play everything myself. I find that as soon as I start involving other people, it starts to get really complicated in terms of trying to get people to get people instinctively on the same page.
Right.
They might be on a similar page, but that's not quite good enough in a way. You have to be on the same page. And if you're not on the same page, then I think, well, I should be doing it then, because then I feel like conceptually it will be more cohesive and more single-minded, less diffuse. If there's one person and they understand how it should be, then really only that person can do it, because trying to explain to somebody else how something should be is a really a losing game from the off. So
Yeah.
I do that as little as possible. And actually, I did come unstuck on this project because at a very early stage in it, while I was recording the very first title, I thought, I'm going to put strings on this, muted strings all the time, and obviously all the tracks will have to have strings of some amount, some more than others, obviously, but they will all have to have strings on to feel of a piece. So at that very early stage, I'd already locked myself into a certain amount of torment by acknowledging that I was going to put strings on everything, and that created no end of difficulties, not only in terms of coming up with the right arrangements, but also having to wait for lockdown to finish on, I think it was like mid-July and 2021,
Right.
before you could actually stick the right number of people in a room together. But actually, as it happened, I'd booked a string session for the 4th of July, and they delayed the so-called Freedom Day by 3 weeks. So I had the choice of either moving my session or going with fewer players and with bigger distances between them. And I went for that latter option, which in hindsight was a mistake. But hey, you play the cards you dealt. And I was so fed up with waiting. I just really wanted to get it done. So I made it work somehow.
So was it close mic strings, or did you do a Decatry, or what? How did you record it?
We did record the Decatry because we did it at. Oh, you obviously know I did it at Rack then. But if you're talking about a Decatry, because they've got one there, or did you not know that?
No, I didn't know that. Sorry.
Okay, well they do have a Decatry at Rack, and I did record that. Unfortunately, it felt too distant to me. I was picking up too much room sound. So actually, I had asked them to put up a pair of ribbon mics and a pair of Valve 67s. Not a pair, but miking each section. So each section had a microphone. So I wouldn't call that close miking. I would call that quite distant miking. I ended up using the ribbons. They had quite a austere sound, whereas the Decatry was quite silky. I didn't think that really fitted with the rather earthy and what's the word, untutored nature of the melodicas, which are in the end very basic instruments, and the ribbon mics fitted best for me with them.
Yeah, it sounded really good. Were you recording? Is it all you recording digital, or did you at any stage were you going to tape or anything like that?
No, my tape days are well behind me. I'm too into the freedom that digital editing allows me. So for me to be able to move things around, especially as I record, and everything's improvised, it's like I can't. I mean, I have recorded on tape, but not since the turn of the millennium. My very first Heligoland album was recorded on 24-track 1-inch tape, but I embraced the limitations of that, and I kind of work within it, and I don't have a problem with that album. It's quite rough around the edges, almost by virtue of the fact that it was recorded on tape, and I couldn't really, I couldn't tidy it up that much. But there are sometimes that works. But I felt very liberated when I could go fully digital, because it just allowed me a lot more freedom to experiment. And I'm sure it's the same with everyone. That there's certain sorts of bands or artists, for whom tape works really well, where you know what you're going to do, or you're going to improvise it all, but you don't have any qualms about keeping everything. You're not going to patch stuff up, or if you are, it's going to be quite basic. So for some kind of projects, tape works great, and I love tape way more. I love the sound of tape more than I do digital,
Yeah.
obviously. But for me, the advantages of digital outweigh the advantages of tape. So reluctantly, also because I don't want to spend huge amounts of downtime ringing a service engineer to come and fix the tape machine that just went down. So it's like there's also that aspect of it. The maintenance of them, even though I'm quite a dab hand at lining them up and keeping them going, I'm not a service engineer. I'm not a maintenance guy. So, I would have to. I spend enough of my equipment spends the time in dry dock without adding loads more moving parts to the equation.
Yeah, I could imagine it was a disaster years ago, especially with SMPTE and splicing tape and pitching things if you wanted. It must have been just a nightmare if you want to do that.
Yeah, I remember SMPTE. It was a whole different way of thinking about recording.
Mm.
Simpler in a lot of ways. You had to live with a lot of stuff, and that's a good thing. It
Yeah.
stops you being so it stops you being so picky. It stops you obsessing about details. So yeah, it's definitely to be welcome. But however, I would say with digital, how some people approach digital, they don't help themselves by recording 40 tracks of guitar and leaving it until the mix and to decide exactly how they're going to sort that out. It's
Yeah.
like I would never go into a mix with those kind of things undecided. So generally, when I go into mix, maybe I would only have 16 tracks live, 60 tracks to 16 faders moving, maybe less than that on some projects. On 10 sketches for piano trio, it was 6 faders. So yeah, I try and keep it minimal where I can.
So when you're mixing now, you're still mixing on the board. You're not mixing in the box or anything like that.
Yeah, I do a mixture. It's for me, mixing in the box and coming out on a stereo pair. That for me, obviously a lot of professional studios need to do that because they need to be able to go back and tweak a mix and have all aspects of it the same.
Yeah.
So they're going to be, if there's something outside the box, they're obviously going to be doing that with all the faders maxed out, and all the kind of signal processing would be done inside the box. But what I do is make life as difficult as possible for myself, of course, by doing a mixture of the two. So I think that there are some things that I think that I use Pro Tools 5.2, which was brought out in about 2002. I think
Whoa.
I'm probably the only person still using Pro Tools
Oh
5.2 on
man,
Mac OS 9.22.
I love it. That's epic, dude.
So it's like I do really like some of the equalization in there. So I use I do use a lot of stuff in the box where I do think where I almost exclusively work outside in the analog world is with reverbs and delays, for which I use tape and I use springs. I don't think
Hmm.
they have good equivalents digitally. I'm not a great fan of digital reverbs. I'm not a great fan of reverb anyway. If I'm honest, I use it if I have a particular reason to use it on um, on the Melodic Apoptosis. All the melodicas have got a Roland Space Echo on
Oh, cool.
RE201, and that's standard throughout. No, I played it with that same one, and that I recorded that echo, and that's the echo that appears on the final mix. You can
Brilliant.
actually hear you can hear the tape loop sticking in places and the pitch going a bit all over the place, especially on track 5. But it's like, yeah, I really like the quirkiness of analog echoes and delays. And I also, although I do some compression digitally, I do a lot of compression analog as well. Because again, you can get a lot of filth from that you just cannot replicate digitally. So there's a certain amount of cleanness about digital that I don't really want, and I'm out to mess it up
Right.
in an analog way at mix stage, and the analog compressors really help that.
Yeah. Are you compressing on the way in, or are you doing a mixture of both, kind of in
No,
and then kind of?
I can't see the advantage of that because I mean, uh, it's sometimes you get it wrong. I mean, I wouldn't so much now because I've been doing it a while, but it's nice to do it on the way out where you can see everything, how you can see exactly how the landscape's lying.
Okay.
So yeah, for me, I just come straight out of microphone amplifiers into Pro Tools. So I'm recording the rawest possible signal,
Okay.
and then I can process as much digitally and analogically as I want to when I'm mixing.
You're not into anything like working with sample strings or any sample instruments, or?
No, not really. They don't. I don't really get much of a kick out of playing them.
Mm. Mm.
I suppose I've got. I guess it's just down to what I enjoy doing, and really, the less time that I can spend at a terminal, the happier I am in a way. So, I kind of, and again, you've got the problem of sampled strings being just that little bit too clean for me.
They're very
So
bright as well.
yeah, got that little bit of that glassiness about
Yeah.
them that kind of bothers me a bit. So yeah, I can't imagine any situation in which I would use that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're kind of like, I guess they're kind of like really pads in a lot of ways. They never, when you put them up, so some people can make them sound great, and then you put them up against a real string section, you're like, okay, that does not sound great.
Well, I think I hear a lot of string pads on all sorts of records, but dance records a lot, I suppose, and they sound fine in that context. I think they work perfectly well. I think there's always something of a mismatch if you're trying to mix
Yeah.
analog sounds with digital. They don't. I've always had a problem getting them to sit together in a way that pleases me. So in some ways, I think they maybe belong better in. Well, this is only my opinion. Obviously, they belong better in a kind of a digitally contrived universe
Hmm.
rather than one that's trying to straddle two worlds, if you like. So, yeah, I don't have a problem with the sound of them in the context of other people's records. They just don't really work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it like working with a Fairlight? I imagine they were just a nightmare sometimes.
Yeah, not at the time because you think you that's all you have, and you think you're aware that it's the kind of latest technology, but I don't think I ever felt that it was in some way beyond me, and I never found it unreliable. I never jumped into Fairlight 3, so I kind of stopped at Fairlight 2,
Right.
which is what you hear on Colour of Spring. So I kind of largely bailed out at that point and let people continue on the Fairlight path without me.
Right.
Yeah, I was. Fairlight 2. It had a very, it had a very distinctive sound. You really can't get away from it. But it's like, and it really dates that album more than anything else does. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I just look on it with some wryness that the use of Fairlight on that very much pinpoints it,
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
history for me.
Whereas like Spirit and Laughing Stock, they're timeless. They could be out of time. They have that kind of sound to them.
Yeah, I think they take a more kind of classic approach where those sounds could have been generated at virtually any time, apart from possibly the decade that they were actually produced in. I think interestingly, the sounds of those last two albums are quite just about as un-80s as you can get.
Yes.
So,
Thank God.
which I'm really happy about.
Yeah, me too.
I made the point on another podcast a couple of weeks ago that when I came out of hibernation, not hibernation, that's very much the wrong word, but when I had came back blinking out into the sunlight, having been making Laughing Stock in the summer of 1990, and heard the things that were around then in terms of like My Bloody Valentine, Lush, and at the beginning of the kind of shoegazing scene. For me that was like, oh, thank God the 80s are gone. Maybe never see their like again. Was basically how that summed it up for me. They always sounded. I never really got on with 80s sounds, so I felt that they were just a bit clean and pointy for me. So I was really I embraced the 90s sonic universe really wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But I think those last two albums took a much more fundamentalist approach to how the sounds were generated.
Yeah, because there's so much albums that have dated horribly since back then, and that's what's great about the '90s. Like even when you listen to like Aphex Twin, like that stuff's dated amazingly. Like they still sound great, and like Massive Attack
really
and those kind of
do.
records. Even
Yeah.
even Loveless like just sounds, that's a fucking amazing record.
Yeah, it is. It's a great record. I know. I think there's something inherently more pleasing for me about the kind of the sort of sounds that were being generated in the 90s as opposed to the 80s. There's a lot of reasons for that, which I probably not appropriate to go into them here. But I think there were a lot of technical and cultural corners were turned, around 88 to 90, and I think that helped to kind of steer the ship in a slightly different direction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Your new record, is there bass on it?
No.
Okay,
No,
I was thinking,
that-
shit, my hearing's fucked.
No, that's a good observation, and there are two reasons why.
It works well though. It works well.
It does work well. There are two reasons why I had decided from a really early stage that I wasn't going to put any bass on that. The first was, and this is probably the first time that I can pinpoint that I've made a record with reference to an external reaction, which is that it was like a statement for me against the fetishization of bass, which has been prevalent for a long time. And although in the right circumstances, standing in front of a pair of bass bins, I'm as much into bass as the next person.
Yeah.
There are times when I just think, come on now. It is about more than just the bass. So I thought, I'm just going to ditch that and and see. I know I can make it work without it. I don't think people will miss it, and this is how I'm going to do it. The second reason was a musical one, and it's slightly technical, but I'll do it as untechnically as possible, which is to say that if you remove the root from chords, it makes those chords, or group of notes, they don't have to be chords in the accepted sense of the word, the lowest note of any chord, especially if it's low as in a bass kind of low, is essentially the determinator of how that chord functions against the chords that are around it. So if you remove that root, it turns all chords and agglomerations of notes into much more ambiguous and fluid things. And I felt I had previously come up against this on previous albums, where I had been very vexed by the fact that when coming up with bass parts, I had been forced to pin down a chord in a way that I really didn't want to do. So I decided for that reason also that I would forego bass, and that there would be no notes lower than the lowest note on the vibraphone, which actually is surprisingly not very low. So I think it's kind of F below middle C. So you can see that I had to generate the idea that it wasn't going to feel lightweight some other way, and obviously I did that by obviously playing drums with felt beaters, so they were quite deep, and tuning them quite deep, and having quite a massive floor tom and quite a large bass drum, and also using very soft mallets on the vibraphone, which means rather than have that really kind of springy, glassy, harmonic-y sound that you get from somebody who's playing a vibe solo on a or even a vibes part on a Motown record, a soul record, of which there are many. Or vibes is such a trendy instrument at the moment. There's a lot of I hear a lot of digital facsimiles, but there are also there's some really good acoustic vibes playing on records at the moment, and I salute that. but when people are playing solo vibes, they tend to play with harder sticks. It gives it a lot, it's a fantastic amount of energy. But I was deliberately played with really quite soft sticks and played quite quietly. It generates quite a lot of low end. So while there aren't that many subs on the record, it does feel quite. It does feel quite deep in its own way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it gives it like without the kind of bass being, like the house of the track almost. It gives it this lovely kind of floaty quality as well. You can kind of float in and out of the music because bass kind of just it brings everything to a point because you're anchoring everything off it. So it has this.
Yeah,
I think it really works well.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that was exactly the effect that I was after. Was that things would feel more, it would feel like a shifting. Mm-hmm. Things were constantly shifting and didn't feel so pinned down. So it was a more amorphous, a more intangible kind of landscape than if you had a bass on it. It felt to me.
Yeah, because you don't miss it. I noticed it, but I didn't miss it. Which is a good thing. It's like if you notice it, then you're like, oh, whatever. But when you just kind of, oh, there's no bass, or is there bass? I think that's a great thing. And like you said, the vibraphone has that kind of. It's almost like kind of sub kind of it's very harmonically rich, so it widens.
It's very
things.
harmonically rich, but it doesn't. The way I did it again, without wanting to get too technical, I did kind of imagine that. The low bass would largely be provided by the kit, but the sitting above that, with kind of in the higher bass register, the vibes take up. They fulfill quite a heavy role there. They do quite a lot of heavy lifting in that kind of higher bass range, and they kind of because they have, as you say, a lot of harmonics. They extend you right up beyond the melodica. So it kind of, I felt that with that particular combination of instruments, that it would give me quite a wide. Quite a lot of width and quite a lot of depth, and if it was recorded in the way that I imagined, so I was really confident that it would work. I wasn't totally sure that it would until I actually started recording, and I was actually quite gratified to find that the things in my head were realisable, because they're not always.
It's a very full sounding record, even though there's you're using not loads of instruments. It sounds very full.
It does sound full, but actually there are versions that are fuller. The other thing that's slightly, it's not as interesting. It was actually really quite tormenting for a while, in that what you end up with on the vinyl and the digital versions. Is that you're actually really listening to the raw mixes. I mastered it 3 times with 3 different people.
Oh wow!
And in the end, I just went back and used the raw mixes. It's just because I felt that any more compression, they were virtually unequable without changing the perspective of the instruments. And I'd mixed it really really carefully mindful of how I wanted things to sit. I wanted the melodica to be in a very undub way.
Right.
The dub melodica, as demonstrated by Augustus Pablo, it sits back behind the groove in a lot of reverb. I imagined these melodicas would sit much further forward in really the most farthest forward thing, and then behind them, behind the melodicas would sit the vibes, and behind them would sit the kit. So
Hmm.
if it was like almost any intervention from a mastering point of view sought to change that relationship in some way. So
Right.
so a lot of the mastering efforts that I got, they sounded more punchy. They made me sound like a better drummer. They made it 4 dB louder, and therefore actually much more like everybody else's records in terms of the actual volume of them.
Yeah.
But I had to come back to, and I kept on playing it to people whose opinion I really respected and going, which of these do you prefer? And they go, yeah, we prefer the master version, Tim. And I go, okay, right, that's good to know. And then 4 weeks later, I go, you know what, I'm not going to use the master version. So it's like, in the end, you just have to go with what feels right. And although it was a really weird thing. I'd listen to the master version, goes, yeah, these are really happening. I really think this really adds something. This really brings something to the party. Well done, you guys. Then I put the original mixes back on, and I go, a bit like a builder going in to see a bit of dodgy plasterwork. Going, I suck my cheeks in and go, yeah, but they've got something. And it's if you listen to the whole album,
Mm.
then you kind of begin to kind of understand the fragility and the slightly amorphous nature of the raw mixes. The mastered versions, almost all of them, felt more solid and a bit less like a bit. Don't have that kind of gossamer quality. So I felt that I gained in a lot of different areas with the mastered versions, but I lost that one thing that I'd striven so hard to capture. So in the end, I goes like, well, fuck it. It's going to be a bit quieter than everyone else's record, and a bit slightly not quite as bassy, but I do think in the long run, this is the one that I'll go in 5 years' time. Yeah, I'm really glad I used those versions. Where if I'd used the other version, any of the other versions, I would have gone, I wish I'd used those raw mixes. So there you go. I'm convinced at this point that I made the right call.
I've seen that you mastered the record at Optimal, the vinyl, which is a great fucking place for mastering vinyl.
Yeah, it is. The only reason that the people that actually pressed it, you mean?
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
pressed it. Sorry, pressed it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
The only reason I used Optimal was because I have for the last while always mastered my stuff at Gearbox, which is a record label that deals a lot with jazz reissues, but not exclusively. But I
Like
just
those
go
bl-
there.
those Blue Note, those new Blue Note records. I think a lot of them are at
Yeah,
Optimal. Sound
yeah,
incredible.
yeah. That's right. So that's because they're all licensed probably through Gearbox. So they all. I have all, and Gearbox only use Optimal as far as I know. But all the stuff
Mm.
that I've had from Optimal has been really good. I'm really happy with. I've always been really happy with what they've delivered to me. Yeah.
Do you are you in the whole camp of vinyl being better than digital? Are you fine about that kind of thing?
I don't mind either. In some ways, I find vinyl, when I've gone to such lengths to get everything just how I want it, vinyl obviously then gives you a whole other set of colorations. So
Yes.
um, I have to kind of live with that if I'm going to go to vinyl, which I keep saying I'm going to stop doing, and then I keep doing it again. No, it's like it's insane because it's so expensive and it takes
Yes.
so long. I had to wait 7 months for this. I think I mastered this with Casper at
Wow.
Gearbox um, in kind of like January and January or early Feb. But I had to book this slot in July. I literally got delivered the vinyl on the day of release, 22nd of July. So that's how long it took.
Wow.
But
That's
it's like
crazy.
in some ways, I think it's kind of worth it. I kind of like doing the artwork for it.
Hmm.
I like the idea of there being a physical version available. I would release it on cassette if I could find any cassette duplicator that gave me anything like a decent frequency response, but I just can't. So I am thinking about the fact, I have been doing this for a while, thinking that I would that I would invite people to pay an incredibly large sum of money for me to make them a cassette dubbed straight from my masters onto an
Oh wow.
Nakamichi, of which I have two. So I could make, I
Wow.
could make really, I can make fantastic cassette copies. But it's like, do I really want to spend my life making other people cassette copies and charging them 25 quid each? I'm not sure that's a good use of my remaining time. So I may put that one on the back burner for a while until I maybe I go in a few years' time. You know what? I'm just stopping this, and then I'm just going to spend the rest until I die. The rest of my remaining years duplicating cassettes for
Yeah.
people.
What a way to go. You could just
Uh,
make one and charge an absorbent amount of money and just get some really die-hard fan that's going to pay whatever
yeah,
for
I
it.
could do I could do that, and I may do that. Whether I have enough die-hard fans is open to question. So I don't know how many I'd make. Five, maybe. I think that would reflect my fan base quite well.
You don't intend to play live or anything with the record.
No, I I couldn't do that, could I? Because I play everything. There's only one. There was an album that I did consider touring, um, which is to say that the second Heligoland album called Pitcher Flask and Foxy Moxie, um, which I kind of had a band lined up for that to some extent. John Parrish, who plays with Polly Harvey, who I've known for a while, was up for playing guitar. Not only up for playing guitar, which I was like really knocked out about because I really rate John Parrish as a guitarist, but he was like, I was saying, you're going to have to like tune it, take a string off, play with five strings, and like change the tuning and play the entire set like that. So you got up for that. And he was like, yeah. So he was on board with it, but in the end, I couldn't. I didn't. The whole idea of taking that amount of show on the road, um, it just became too logistically. I couldn't make it work logistically, so I had to unfortunately and reluctantly ditch the idea of doing it. But it's like, but given that almost every performance of almost all the albums I've made since then are strictly one-offs, I just can't imagine how I would ever play any of the parts again, never mind all of them. So, and to like delegate them to somebody else, um, just seems like you get a whole different record, and I don't think I would want a whole different record because I couldn't guarantee that I would like it, but I can at
Right.
least guarantee that I like this record, and that's why probably the only version of it that I'm prepared to countenance because it's the only one that I know I like. There might be an infinite number of universes with other versions of the record, but I might not like them. So that's why I would never take them on the road, which is also why I think attempts to play the last two Talk Talk albums are ill-advised. Purely from my point of view, they were all born of improvisations, although whittled down improvisations, which is to say that almost, well over 90% of 95% of everything that anyone ever played was erased. That's well known. But I think to try and kind of make those records again is not something that I think is a great idea. Mark, for that reason and other reasons, also decided he wasn't going to tour anything beyond Colorado Spring.
Yeah. Did you still listen to those records, or they're kind of just like you've done them and that's it?
No, I don't feel as kindly towards them as I once did. So
Oh,
I got the reasons for that are various, but I would never put one on. There's various moments in them that if I were to hear one, I'd go, okay, yeah, that was quite neat. I quite like that. Things I really, I really if I hear like what you make on the radio, I would turn it down for sure. If
really?
we have six music on in our house permanently at some level or another, and it does come on from time to time. I just turn it down. The only thing I like on that is Mark's thunderclap Newman piano solo, which I think is genius. But that's the only thing about that record that I can listen to with anything approaching pleasure. So yeah,
Wow.
I
Wow.
know, but I don't need to like them, do I? It's like that they're done, and I've moved on. I do other things.
Hmm.
They're a very long time ago, and I don't go back there. I might reference them in passing in these kind of conversations, but
Mm.
they don't form any kind of part of my contemporary landscape at all.
Yeah. I guess people are always trying to like define people by what they know and what they like, and they kind of expect you to kind of feel the way they do about things, and you know.
I know, and I find that. Well, I don't know whether they do because I mean, people don't come up and ask me whether, especially ask me to own the records in terms of liking them.
Hmm.
Obviously, people might randomly come up to me and say, and high five me or buy me a pint or so they might do that, and they do that. But obviously, I accept that with as good a grace as I can.
Hmm.
But it's nothing that I just accept it as something that happens as some historical whim.
Right,
But
right, right.
I don't give it a huge amount of thought, if I'm honest.
I get you. I liked um I liked the way you didn't put the album on Spotify, because those
Well,
motherfuckers, those
yeah,
motherfuckers.
that's another interesting observation. And actually, I had before it was released. Obviously, I had a lot of time while I was waiting for the vinyl. Um, and I thought really carefully. I'd moved everything out off my website, which I've now closed down commercially,
Hmm.
and moved it onto Bandcamp, which although I did think that it was ironic and very typical me that as a very much a late adopter, exactly the point that I shifted onto Bandcamp, it having been such a right-on platform for so long, it was bought out by a gaming company
Oh
virtually the day.
no.
No, Epic Gaming. I mean, it may be the case that they'll keep exactly the same modus operandi, in which
Hopefully.
case that's fine. But once I'd made that decision to move over to Bandcamp, then had to decide what other digital domains, if any, I was going to embrace. There were plenty of times when during that 6 months when I was moving over to Bandcamp and getting the calcium chloride website, the calcium chloride page going, um, and thinking about where else it was going to be, I thought, it's really stupid not putting it on Spotify. I should do that because obviously I'm missing out on a lot of people hearing it. But in the end, having kind of dallied with the idea and then shrunk back from it in horror because I couldn't live with it, I I just did that one too many times, and I thought you need to stop this now. Just stop even considering the idea you're going to put it on Spotify, because if you do, you're going to hate yourself.
Mm.
So I just stop even entertaining the idea. And I did. The only thing that I did do, which was my idea of a compromise, was that I put it on iTunes and Tidal, and the only reason I put it on iTunes is because I wanted it Shazamable, which it
Ah,
is.
okay.
So I couldn't find any way to do that as a standalone item. If I could, I would have done. I think it's the case. I've read this one. I know it's true. Once something's on Shazam, that it stays there forever. So I could actually delete it off iTunes and Tidal, and it would stay on Shazam.
Okay.
However, it might not, and maybe I'm just prepared. I was prepared to live with that situation when I pressed the button going iTunes and Tidal, but
Yeah.
not checking the box marked Spotify. So if I could live with it then, I should live with it now. So I've kind of left it up on those two streaming platforms. I don't think many people will find it there, and I'm fine with that. But I need to be able to live with myself, and I cannot live with my stuff being on Spotify because I would just feel such a hypocrite. I just think it's such a terrible business model. Not for me, because it's like this is hardly my living. So, but there's so many artists for whom making records is a living. I know
Hmm.
they supplement that largely by playing live, and good luck to them with that as well, because that's increasingly difficult. But I, I, I feel really bad for people that get £100 for a million streams. That is for songwriting. Not you get more as an artist, but
Yeah.
it's still not a huge amount of money, and it's not really a living wage. So I think it's a poor business model for musicians, and I think obviously we'd like the situation to be different, other than what it is, and who knows what's around the corner. But at the moment, I'm happy with my decision, and I'm prepared to live with the consequences.
I like it. I was like, go on, man. That was cool. I really liked it. Plus, it sucks on Spotify is, you spend all that time recording something and trying to make it as good a sound as possible, and then it's at 320, and you're like, it's shit quality. Like, what?
Yeah,
You know?
I know. I mean, but if you want to record, if you want to download an MP3 from Bandcamp, you can do that. I mean, I've obviously uploaded WAVs, full res files.
Yeah, I
So
downloaded it in the RAVs when I bought WAV files when I bought it.
yeah, okay. Thank you for that. I would imagine that most people now, with download speeds being what they are, most people would now download WAVs. So
Yeah.
I'm confident that most people will hear it pretty much as I would like them to. So yeah, I'm cool with that.
Do you think also from like a psychological point of view of the way we are of like human beings, when we kind of buy something, we've made an investment into it, so you listen to it more because you've invested in it. Whereas Spotify, it's free, like everything's free, and you're kind of. I know younger people, they just listen to one song of an artist and that's it. And they don't listen to
Yeah,
the album.
but it's like they don't even listen to one song, and
Yeah,
I only know this because obviously I observe my kids doing it, but it kind of freaks me out a bit when I see when they kind of listen to 40 seconds or something, they're halfway through the chorus, then they skip. It's like, what the
yeah,
fuck? Like,
yeah.
dude, give me a break. It's like I don't understand. It's like, why is your attention span so short that you can't even get up to the second verse? I find that bizarre. But it's like, and if you don't like it, then why is it on your playlist? So I don't
Mm,
know.
mm.
I find it slightly baffling, but I do accept that that is the way a lot of people consume music now. But I think one of the other reasons I think you again have made a good observation there. I don't think my stuff, almost any of it, lends itself to that kind of quite cursory seeing to. I think if somebody tried to get into melodic apoptosis on Spotify on the basis of listening to the first 30 seconds of each track, they're obviously going to go, "I just don't get this stuff. What I don't. It's just not going anywhere." So I could totally see why Spotify is not the ideal, well, and a streaming service generally is not really the ideal medium for something that I think you would like kind of ingest in a more
Hmm.
leisurely way. So, yeah, I sometimes I feel a bit. I feel it's a bit self-indulgent in 2022 to like put out an album like that in a way that it feels like a bit conceited to be going, you know what, you can't skip this because it takes so fucking long to get anywhere that you'll have to invest at least 4 minutes to before you even begin to understand what it is I'm on about. Yeah, I feel that that's a bit of a I feel that's a bit of a lot to ask of people. And yeah, in a way, in the end, I have to shrug and go, yeah, but I can only make, and I keep coming back to this in my own head, is you can only make the record that you want to make. And I can't,
Exactly.
in the same way that 4 years ago, I was very up for making the Shorthead Domestic album, and that was the only record that I could make at that point because it was very much demanding to be made. After that, then this one was like, yes, that I can't imagine making another record apart from this one. So it's like this was the only record that was on the cards, and it just doesn't really happen to be a streaming kind of record for me, but or a Spotify record particularly. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just have to shrug and go, well, that was just the record that I had to make. That
Yeah.
was it, really.
But it's like I remember talking to some girl I was dating at the time, and she was like, "What? Who do you make music for?" And I was like, "Myself." And she couldn't grasp at that concept. And I'm thinking, if every musician was honest, they would say they make it for themselves. Because if you're making it for other people, you're gonna start kind of making shit because you're gonna compromise. And if you're making for yourself, you might love it and everyone else might hate it, but at least you can live with it.
Yeah, I mean, I have done earlier in my career. I did do that thing of like being that kind of producer where your job in the studio was not only to represent the artistic endeavours of the band, but
Hmm.
also to serve the interests of the record company, who obviously wanted to protect their investment. So if they go, there's 3 singles on this album, Tim, just make sure they're as like commercial as you can get them, or and they'd want to pop in from time to time and make sure that it was sounding the way that the A&R guy envisaged.
Hmm.
So I have been in that place, and I kind of wonder whether it was easier then than now, but maybe that's just because I'm not making that kind of record now. But I think back in the early 80s, maybe I felt like I had some kind of grasp of what made a successful record that
Okay.
might be acceptable at radio, for example. These days, I don't feel like I have any kind of inside track on that at all, and I hear a lot of so many things that I think are really interesting
Mm.
and out there and yet successful. So I think, well, yeah, but if you asked me ahead of the game whether I thought that record would be a hit, I'd go, no, it's way too out there, way too left field. And yeah, it's great that bands like Jockstrap are doing really well. I really support that kind of creativity where you just think, wow, that's really wacky, and yet they're signed really quickly, making an album, get played a lot. Hats off to them.
Yeah, and like it's even something small like people go around listening to Kate Bush now, which is great. But I mean,
Yeah,
so many people didn't know who Kate Bush was, and like now she's number one in the world. I'm like, that is so mad. Great, but
yeah,
it's so mad that just because of a show, she's like number one.
yeah. That is pretty amazing, and a testament to the way that song can get under your skin.
Yeah.
Although, yeah, there are some really remarkable performances on that record. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
Hounds of Love is a fantastic record. I guess you're going back saying about 80s. It does still have an 80s, she's got that Fairlight kind of the drums and all that stuff. But in a weird way, it kind of stands out from a lot of those albums too, even though it is of its time, but it's Kate Bush, so, you know.
Yeah, maybe. I think because of that, Phil, I think I probably I think of it as a very 80s album, but I think Kate's performances on that like transcend
Yes.
any kind of pigeonholing in terms of a style. So
Hmm.
I I kind of I think of it as 80s, but in a good way.
Yes, yes. When you're especially for the newest record, or your latest record, do you do you listen to much music, or do you prefer to kind of just go on your own vibe? Because sometimes when you listen to stuff, it can kind of seep in, and you can kind of, you know.
I don't think that other people's stuff ever affects what I'm doing.
Really?
No, actually, I'm gonna caveat that. That's not true. I don't it, stuff that I listen to while I'm doing it doesn't affect it.
Aha.
However, because by that time conceptually it's already pretty much fixed. However, there may be some key albums that I will have listened to
Hmm.
in the run up to the formulating the concept for an album, and they may well have fed into the process. So I would say that for the Shorthead Domestic album, before that I was listening to a lot of Sun Ra.
Oh, wow.
So I was that was there's quite a lot of that in there, and for this, probably not really anything in particular. I could probably say the drums. I could probably say the really the rough idea for the drums may have come from Pink Floyd and Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun,
Right.
but I would, that might be stretching it a bit. But I think that's probably the only thing. The Melodica, I think I'd like to think that I kind of got my initials on that way of treating it within this framework,
Mm.
and my vibes playing is lifted pretty much completely from soul records and maybe a bit of modern classical here and there. There's a little bit of a minimalism maybe creeps in just a little bit here and there in kinds of repetitions and
Yeah.
dislocations over bar lines, that kind of thing. There's maybe a little bit, but whether that, I don't think that's anything that I've been listening to currently. I think that's just stuff that I've kind of absorbed by osmosis over the decades.
Yeah.
But the Sun Ra thing, because I don't listen to much, uh, 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 I don't listen to much in a very concentrated way. I listen to
Hmm.
Six music in a very diffuse way, in a very in passing kind of way, in a very casual way. But I listen to Sun Ra in a much more considered manner. So that's how I know it interested me enough to want to work out exactly what kind of concepts were in play and some of the things he was playing with. But there's so many Sun Ra albums out there. I
Yeah.
mean, his discography is
It's
so
crazy.
massive, but it's like I've got a fraction of what he produced, but it's all. I can't speak too highly of Sun Ra's output. I just think he's the most brilliant musician.
Yeah, he's incredible.
I just love. There's almost the only thing stuff that his that I don't like is like his really early stuff, which is just a bit too conventional for me. But once he goes full Space Cadet, I'm with him all the way.
Are you into Roland Kirk?
Yeah, but not in the same way that I don't have that kind of. Um, I don't have that kind of visceral affection for him that I have for Sun Ra.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I do. But yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't call myself a jazz fan, but then I wouldn't call Sun Ra a jazz musician.
Hmm.
He's fringes that for sure. But it's almost like he's invented his own genre, which is only belongs to him, and he's the only person in it. So I think he's very much one of a kind.
Yeah, he's definitely for sure. I had said to you when I listened to the record, it's always weird saying to people when you hear the records and you're like, oh, I thought this bit sounded like this because it's your own opinion. But I had said to you about the Ron Grainer stuff. That kind of, I don't know if you ever heard or ever watched The Prisoner, but there's these kind of little moments in it that has this kind of vibraphone,
Yeah,
and I was
it's
like,
it's
whoa,
it's like that gave me a feeling that I've had many times,
right,
where people come up to me and say, "Oh, this," or I listen to somebody on the radio going, "Oh, we really like this that Tim did, and we're really influenced by it." And then you listen to what they did, and you think, "Well, I don't understand what you
yeah,
got from
yeah,
that. Where
yeah,
did you get there from here? So what have you taken exactly? I don't hear it." And in that respect, I don't. I'm not going. Hey, Paul, you're completely wrong. I don't. That's got no basis in fact at all. It may well do, and I obviously watched The Prisoner when I was much smaller than I am, and I do remember it. And
yeah,
actually, I went on Spotify and I listened to a bit of Ron Gray. Now, having read your email, just to remind myself what I was, just in case I was remembering it wrong,
yeah.
I probably wasn't. So I don't personally understand what you mean, but I totally respect your right to want to make that connection. And I don't have any problem with it because I think Ron Gray and his output is, largely very awesome. So I'm
Yeah,
not going
okay.
to turn up my nose at being compared to him.
Well, there's these little tiny moments in The Prisoner where they're almost like backgroundy kind of vibraphone sections that I don't think they're even on the scores online, that I was like, oh, what kind of had that vibe. Not that it sounded like it, but something can kind of remind you of something,
Sure.
even if it has the own vibe. But I kind of always, I kind of, it's weird saying it to someone when they create something because you're like, oh, it sounds like that or it sounds like this, and you're like, oh fuck, because it's
Yeah.
not what they had in mind. So I was like, oh shit, I hope it didn't, you know what I mean? I'm like, oh
Yeah.
crap. So yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah, but I don't think there's many people that would be compared to Ron Grainer would start to stand there, legs akimbo, with their hands on their hips, going, "What do you mean, Ron Grainer? I don't know. I don't hear that at all, and I'm very insulted by that." I don't think you were going to get that from anyone,
well,
really.
good, you didn't get it. The album, I when I first heard it, and I was thinking kind of video wise, because I know you did a video of it. But do you ever watch those videos on YouTube where it has a train that goes from like Oslo to fucking some other place, and it's just that? I've watched them sometimes, just like spacing out. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, in speed it up or in real time?
in real time, like
Yeah.
sometimes I'll like
I, wa-
mute
I,
it.
wa- I was quite. I don't think I was influenced, but I think I was reminded of this after I did that video with my son Dylan, who actually shot it on Super 8. Um, I was reminded of something that I saw, this program I saw on TV a couple of years ago, of basically just a camera on a bus going through the Yorkshire Dales in real
Ah,
time. And it was just like, so you heard it stopping at bus stops, you heard people getting on, talking to the driver, then the bus would start again, it's like, so, and then you'd see more countryside. Nothing ever happened. And I was really into that. It reminded me of watching Big Brother at night when everyone was asleep, and like nothing ever happens, which was the only time that I could ever conceive of watching Big Brother. And it was, but
I
it did
love
remind me.
it.
I do really like things. Where nothing happens. And actually, that brings me quite neatly onto my plan for the next album, which I'm going to start in a month or so, hopefully.
Oh,
But
cool.
so I'm going to. I've decided that all being well, unless suddenly have a panic attack in the interim, but I don't think I will. I'm gonna live stream the entire recording of it.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but I think I'm not expecting anyone to watch it. I consider it largely an artistic conceit, but I think I think it will amuse me for sure. The idea of people being able to meet. There'll be sound, so people can watch me at any time of day, playing an instrument to which they won't be able to hear the backing because I'll be wearing headphones, presumably, but they might hear it. I'll obviously mic up the control room and have a camera in the control room too, so they might hear if I'm playing through speakers, then they'll hear everything. But they might, otherwise, I might just be playing a Shawm or Vibes or something in the studio. But anyway, but that will be on 24/7, and I might work at night or I might be working during the day. I just
Nice.
think it's quite a. I like the idea of so just to delve into this concept just a little further. I like the idea of a non-curation of image. I have been a bit increasingly fed up over the years by people who are really careful to curate their image in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
what photographs are allowed out, what their artwork looks like, that it fits that it presses certain buttons or that kind of thing. So it's like ever since I started making records on my own, I was almost since the beginning. I've adopted a very I've never had any posed photographs I've never released any posed photographs. They're all photographs which have been taken usually without me knowing or in a very informal setting.
They're the best ones.
Um, so, yeah, they are their best ones for sure. And even Mark, when he was doing interviews, he would never allow himself to be photographed separately. He was like, you could photograph me while I'm being interviewed, but I'm not doing a photo shoot afterwards. So it's just similar sort of thinking to that in a way, but it's also oh God, sorry, I've lost my thread. I forgot where I was in terms of
Live streaming pictures in your
yeah.
image.
Image. Oh, yeah. I was going to. Sorry. Yeah. I was going to go on to album covers and how I don't really have any kind of look to album covers. That they don't usually involve putting things in places. They don't have any mise en scène in terms of like setting up in a studio any kind of look or anything. So the Picture Flask and Moxie album is just a random shot of crap in a studio with the name of the Heligoland painted on a bit of hose pipe. So it's very casual, and I don't have any particular kind of look to the artwork as it goes through. But I'm kind of trying to get away from any kind of curation. And although I'm aware that other people have watched while recording, I think that to make yourself available 24/7 sets kind of something of a new boundary in it,
Yeah.
that there is no boundary. People can watch me at any time doing nothing largely or not even there. So but I would consider that to be as exciting as watching Big Brother at night.
Yeah.
It's what I used to do. So
That's cool. I love all that kind. I'm a weird, not weird, but I like doing music and having the TV on mute. Like sometimes I'll play piano and have the TV on
yeah, a
mute. Do
lot
you
of
do
people
that?
do that. That's kind of a weirdly interesting thing to do. I don't think I've ever.
Bargain hunt playing piano.
Okay, I salute that. It's not something I do myself, but I like the way that you think that you can play and watch Bargain Hunt at the same time. I call that serious multitasking.
Well, I'm kind of half watching it, but kind of once they get to the auction part, I'll probably demute it and then
Yeah.
give it an I'll watch there.
Yeah,
But
but it's like, for me, it's like it's a struggle for concentration anyway, or not a struggle for concentration because actually I've never had trouble concentrating in the studio. It's the only place I don't have trouble concentrating. I
right
can concentrate for hours at a stretch without a break. I'm legendary for it.
in the
But
studio.
yeah,
Wow.
I can when I was. When I'm producing other people, but more than when I'm on my own, when I'm producing other people to a timetable, I can work incredibly long hours without a break and still function really well. But
Wow.
what I do struggle for is that moment of immersion where you where you are only in the moment and nowhere else, and that is the time where you're always going to be playing your best stuff. The only problem with being in the moment and nowhere else is that if you're playing into anything that has a chord sequence, of course you're going to completely forget that there's a chord change coming up because you're in the
Mm-hmm.
moment,
Mm-hmm.
not the moment coming up. So it's only really works when you're working with something which is either free form or very improvised, or you're kind of the first thing on there. But it's like I really search for those moments because they mean your concentration is 100%, and that's when kind of improvisation becomes really kind of inspired for me. So
Yeah,
I do treasure those times when I can grab them.
that's cool. So your newest record that you're not the latest one, but the newest one that's coming up. How much of that have you written all of it? Or are you just starting to write it, or what's the process exactly?
No, I have a very loose concept for it. I'm not. It's a very tight concept, but
Hmm.
how that concept will be fleshed out is incredibly loose. So I'm not going to tell you what that is because I think to some extent that will spoil it.
Yeah.
Because if I tell you that, we go, what you'll just go, well, that's just really stupid. So I'm not going to. I'm not going to tell you what the concept is. But what it will. But the thing that I will say probably about it is that uh, uh, during lockdown, I asked some friends, some of them quite celebby and some not, to write some haikus.
Okay.
And so the vocal aspect of and then they came down to my studio after the lockdown and recorded them. So the vocal aspect of this will be provided by other people reading their own haikus. That
Hmm.
is that is my that is it as it stands. Obviously, until I actually try it and see if it works, I can't say that that's how it's going to end up. But that at the moment is what I'm aiming for. And if it doesn't work, it will be the first time so the first time in the last 10 years that an idea I've had for something conceptually, I've had to completely scrap. So I may have to tweak it to some extent, but I'm thinking that in my head, it feels like it is a sound concept. Therefore, I'm
Cool.
hoping that it's going to come out all right. But
That's
I'm hoping to record it quite quickly. But I always say that, and it never is. So I expect it's going to be 6 months. That seems to be standard these days.
Yeah, it's like that thing, I'm gonna get this done really quickly, and then you start doing it, and you're like, yeah, but I could do this, and I could do, it's like
Yeah,
that's always what happens, and you're like, and no one, I think everyone outside people that don't do music, they all kind of think, hey, what's taking you so long? You're like, yeah, but you did, like, trying to explain that to people is quite difficult, you know?
Yeah, it is because they just think, well, you just must be really lazy.
Yeah,
Either really lazy or really crap. You think, oh, no, actually, I'm neither of those things. It just takes longer than you think it does. The only way to make records quicker is to like place some really severe limitations on yourself.
hmm,
And that usually that involves not working digitally, because as soon as you work digitally, of course, then you're into that whole shtick that we were talking about before. It's like if you record straight to quarter-inch tape, so that's like you're mixing as you go, or something like that, or somehow you're going to say, okay, we're going to do. You can do it digitally, but we're going to do no digital editing whatsoever, and we're just going to go in the studio for 4 days, and that's it, and then we've got to be finished, and we're going to release whatever we come out with. You've got to be really strict about those things if you're going to
yeah,
make records quickly, because in a
yeah.
digital world, it doesn't lend itself to making quick records.
No, it doesn't. It's just the endless river of choices, which is
Yeah,
can
too
be
many
a
choices.
yeah. It's like that thing of watching the Netflix analogy. You go on there and there's about 1,000 things and you don't watch anything. You just go, oh, I'm not
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
watch anything. It's all shite. But back to live stream and the record. Are you gonna put that? Is it gonna be YouTube, or have you got anywhere you're gonna dedicate that to?
Um, I I've been looking. That's one of the things that I've been looking at over the last fortnight, because I wanted to get it together quite quickly. But it does look like YouTube is the better option. Yeah, but you can't. The downside is that you can't monetize it. But then I was never going to monetize it anyway. So it's like, at least it's a platform that is ubiquitous, whereas like Twitch and all that kind of things, I don't think they're quite as widespread. So I think that it makes more sense to use YouTube. It's just whether, and I know that people have done 24/7 streaming on YouTube before, so I'm pretty sure it can be done. I just need to get cameras, microphones, laptop, Wi-Fi. Should be ready to go. Really, that should be it.
Yeah, OBS. There's a program called OBS that's good to kind of do stuff where you can kind of hook your interface up, because YouTube is sometimes weird, glitchy when you're kind of going from an interface straight onto YouTube. So if you use a thing called OBS, it's a free like software. It's really good for kind of having things that aren't shit, and I think you can kind of
Oh, okay. That's a really helpful tip. I'll
yeah,
definitely look into that.
yeah. Because when I used to
If
do
you want
these,
to say, if you want to send me a link to that, that would
I
be
will
really
indeed.
helpful.
I will indeed. And yeah, yeah. But so the back to the your new record. When you're records in general, when you're writing, how long do you spend, like we'll say, writing a song before you know it's finished, or is there you don't put any time limits on yourself or anything like that?
I no, but that's slightly back in the day of writing when I used to write songs like that. Um, I can't quite remember my process, but these days I just don't work that way. Like with melodic apoptosis, for example, I might start with the vibes on a particular track and come up with a starting point. Then I might play a little bit of a few bars of that, or then I might set a tempo, play to a click, and then play some drums. Then I might go back to the vibes again. Then I might go, okay, now I need to see whether there's a viable melodic melody that goes over this. So then I go to melodica, and then so it's like it fits together like piece by piece and kind of sequentially. So things
Uh-huh.
get slotted in together as they go along, and in a rather amorphous and difficult to describe way. But in terms of, I haven't for a while actually made a record where I've actually sat down and written a song. I haven't done that for quite a long time. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not dissing it. It's just that I feel that I've the song format for me at the moment is not where my head's at. But that's not to say that I wouldn't go back to it. And actually, for the album after this next one, I am thinking to going back to a song format where I'm just singing with one other instrument and a Wasp synthesizer. That's where I might go with that. So that's the one after this one. So
Oh, wow.
I'm always one album ahead. So the one I'm about to start, I've had nailed down for ages, but at the moment I'm fleshing out the one after that. So that will gradually solidify in my brain sometime over the next year, I imagine. I'll start
I
that.
love that you're doing it on a Wasp synthesizer. That thing is a mental synthesizer. I remember
Yeah,
Behringer brought one
the
out
whole
years ago.
the Shorthead Domestic album was done on a Wasp. It was the only synth that was on there, so it's some testament to its flexibility that I was able to get an entire album out of it. I mean, obviously,
Brilliant, man.
there's guitars and stuff on it as well, but that is the only synth, and there's quite a lot of synth bass. But it's a really fun. It's a really fun thing for somebody who doesn't like having too many choices. Just have to have the ADSR and not too much else. It's like that really works well for me.
Is it an original Wasp, or is it the? I know Behringer bought
No,
a Wasp out years ago. Behringer made this really great clone of a Wasp.
I didn't know about that, but I definitely have an original one. To the point whereby if you press too hard on the keyboard, which is obviously just a flat, a bit of plastic with the keys painted on it,
Yeah.
on a bit of strip of plastic, the case is so flimsy that the whole thing bows. And it kind of becomes like bowl shaped.
I
It's a
love it.
bastard to play, but I did for the SHD album. I did hook it up. There is a little MIDI interface that you can get for it, which is really limited, but you can play it with a decent keyboard. You don't have to use the one they give you. So I did do
Cool.
that for some of it.
That's
It's
cool.
a great machine.
That they're the records you did with your wife.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I gotta check those out, man. I didn't
Yeah,
check them. I'm gonna check them out.
I'm a big fan of that record. It was quite difficult to make in that it's like Lee and I come from very difficult musical worlds, but
Okay.
I did, we had some collisions, but I did, as is my wont, I did conceptually scour it to the nth degree before I started it. Before I even put the idea to her, I said, "This is how it could work. We have our own separate spheres of autonomy, and this is how it will be." And she was up for doing it in that way. And as it happened, it worked okay. But it was probably the only way that it could have worked. But I think the kind of I'm a big fan of my wife's singing and lyrics, so I knew that in terms of I knew I wouldn't have to worry about what she would come up with because I knew I'd be cool with it. So I just felt that there was a good record to be made there in a kind of loose, kind of hip hop, but not obviously, but with a slight nod to those kind of tempi and that kind of weight.
Yeah.
So that was the bones of it
Oh,
really.
that's
But I am a
cool.
big it's a good record. I don't go around recommending my records to people, but I do recommend that one because it's quite approachable
Okay.
and fun.
Well, I gotta listen to it now. So you know,
You have to
yeah, yeah,
now.
yeah. It's a legal matter. Um,
Yeah.
do you
Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. I was gonna say, do you still have a Variophone?
I do have a Variophone.
Oh man,
I still have the original one that I
that's
played all the talks and stuff
are
on.
you
Um,
serious?
yeah, I
That's
am.
brilliant.
I had two, and I sold one to John Parrish because he did an album with Polly that had quite a lot of Variophone on it, and he wanted to take one out on the road. So I sold him one that he could have. Unfortunately, I'm really miffed about this. I sold him the best one,
Oh
so
no.
I left myself the pig.
Oh
So
no.
I've got a bit of a pig. But the problem with all Variophones now, given that they were made in the early '80s,
Yeah.
is that they have a kind of a diaphragm, which is like one of the main parts of the transducer that transmits the sound pressure from you blowing into some electrical energy. So that diaphragm that forms part of that transducer, the glue on that has now largely perished. So
Ah.
I don't think there are probably, and I don't think it's a user serviceable part. I don't think there are probably any, unless they've been kept in a some kind of like oxygen-free vacuum environment. I would imagine there are probably no working Variophones anymore. I think mine does work, but it probably doesn't work very optimally, and I really need to get rid of it because I will never use it again. I don't think Variophone is. It's too. You can't get away from talk with it. That's the problem.
Right.
In the same way that if you play a Mellotron, you can't get away from King Crimson. If you play Variophone, you can't really get away from talk. So it's too much of a signifier for me
I get you.
to really use it, and I've largely abandoned that quite a long time ago.
Yeah. You could get maybe an orchestron. You know, have you heard of those Vaco orchestrons? They were like
Yeah,
they're great sound. I mean, they're meant to like, but they have their
yeah,
own sound. You know, I'm very interested in kind of instruments that have their, even if they're kind of shitty, There's something you can kind
In
of
some
do
way,
with
in
them.
some ways, the more shitty the better. And various
Yes, yes.
were really quite temperamental. So, I really saluted John Parrish for taking one out on the road, because it's like it's like it's like have that story of Keith Emerson having this engineer under the stage trying to keep his Moogs in tune, his screwdriver. I'm not sure how apocryphal that is, but anyway, it felt like taking a Variaphone on the road would be a bit like that.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good for your brain. All the
No.
breakdowns with that.
Yeah. Well,
That's for
it's like
sure.
for suddenly to go like really ape in the middle of a song. That's like could be really embarrassing.
Yeah, it has a sound though. I remember when I first heard it, I was like, "What the fuck is that thing? That sounds great!" Like, but in a good way. Like, it's like
Yeah.
Jesus, because you're not sure is it a real instrument. I was like, "Is that a real instrument?" It's like, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's the kind
Yeah.
of the joy of it.
Some of the woodwind facsimiles are more convincing than others. But the trumpet is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very, very cool. So you're already like, so you've got the album you're gonna do next, and you already are on to the next one after that. Do you have
Yeah.
when you're doing that, do you have like titles for them, or just that comes when?
No, I don't. And actually, titles is always a big problem for me, because quite often these things are um, uh, quite abstract concepts, and it's always quite difficult for me to get away from that, and give it some kind of concrete identity. As soon as you start titling something, you're putting pictures in people's brains, and that's not
Uh-huh.
always what I want to do. But you see, I can't go back to the numbering thing, because I did that on 10 sketches. 10 sketches for
Yeah.
piano trio is just numbered 1 to 10, and I'm fine with that. But I don't feel like I can go back and do that again. I feel like I don't think you can do that more than once. So, and actually, it did come to me after I'd finished Melodic Apoptosis that there was a narrative there.
Mm.
And if you want to know more about that, or anyone listening to this podcast wants that, I would remind you that there is a 300 tweet Twitter blog at fatpet3, FATPET number 3, it was a contemporaneous Twitter stream that I did while I was recording the album, and I do go into that in some detail about how I came by the titling thing, how I felt that I was kind of doing a disservice to the album by making it an abstraction when actually it wasn't an abstraction, and there was clearly something in my subconscious that was giving it a journey from A to B, and that's why I ended up having to title it. And I was so very careful as to how to title it and title the tracks, and they had to not only engender the feeling of the track but
Mm.
work within the framework as a whole. That's why the titles took me so long to arrive at. But yeah.
I love the way the record ends. It's got this lovely kind of oh, what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah,
Like
there's
a
something that's
spray
it's
it.
got an incredibly long F sharp chord, which really it's like refuses to grind to a halt, but
Yeah,
does
yeah,
keep
yeah.
going in a very. What I'd like to feel is a very. It kind of peters out in a very optimistic way. I like to think, in keeping with the title of it, and as befits the last title, the last track on the album. Sorry, where you've obviously gone through some traumatic experience, but managed to come to terms with it. So I feel like it does that job pretty well.
Yeah, man, I love that song or piece, I should say. Everyone's got a song.
What, that
Uh,
last one?
yeah, I love that one, but I love Rats, or I'm gonna say it, Rates on the Beach at Dawn. Did I get that
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
a beautiful. I mean, they're all like beautiful, but I when I first heard that, it kind of pricked my ears because when the strings come in, I was like, "Wow, that sounds cool." It was kind of unexpected, and I like that.
yeah,
You're not expecting something, even if it's for like a moment. It's just like it comes in and it comes out, and I always like when I hear something and you don't
yeah.
expect it because nowadays you hear music and you kind of know what chord's coming next, and there's no fun in that.
No, I agree with that. But it's like interesting to me how one can still come up with. And actually, one of the things that I quite like about that album is the fact that okay, take track. Oh, so what can be saved? I think it's track 5, which is essentially. So it only goes apart from the intro. Well, the intro is the same. So the whole verse just goes between 1 and 4. It's only a 1 and a 4 chord. The only difference is that the third is on is at the bottom of the chord, and then it does really quite a cunning modulation into the chorus, and then an even more cunning modulation back into the verse again. So, but my point is that they are incredibly simple chords, but I don't believe that I've heard them in that particular context, which is why I think I've managed to avoid some kind of repetition somewhere along the line by presenting very well-worn objects in new contexts. So that's that's the grail for me. Is like, how can I keep something simple but yet avoid the banal and avoid something that I feel like I've heard before.
Yeah, yeah. And plus, from even a like sound perspective and the color of the sound of the record, it has that kind of out of time feel. You can go, that's from that year or that's from that year. It has that kind of,
Yeah,
which is cool. I think that's a great thing to kind of strive for, because like once you kind of can pinpoint a year or a kind of thing, it almost becomes like fashionable. It's tied to a
yeah,
fashion or a thing. So, I like that.
yeah. I think that was. I think I don't think because of the way I like to record, I don't think I'm ever going to be zeitgeisty in a sound sense, because I'm just not prepared to use those kind of sounds. So yeah, I think I'm always going to feel probably too generally analog but not in a maybe analog more in a microphonic sense rather than in a kind of like an 80s an original Prophet 5, because obviously everyone's got an original Prophet 5 now that's got 10 grand to rub together.
Yeah. Do you have a big collection of like instruments, or do you just
No, you
keep it
see,
low?
this is one of the things this is one of my methods of managing to record so quickly in no more than 6 months by limiting choices. I have a
Ah,
really
yes.
small select microphone collection. I only have a Wasp synthesizer. I have I deliberately keep my software out of date, so I can't overload it with plugins, because otherwise it just can't work fast enough. So I deliberately work at a basic level in order to force myself to stay simple and not fuss about with too many choices. So, it's all part of my grand plan to avoid spending too much time pissing about, basically, which is you can do indefinitely unless you set yourself some boundaries, and those are my boundaries. I don't have a massive mic collection, and I don't have a lot of instruments.
Yeah, that's
The
a
other one
good.
thing I have too many of, the one thing I do have too many of, and I'm the first person to admit this, I have way too many shakers. So if there's a shaker overdub to be done, that's going to take most of the day because I have so many. But I do like a shaker, so there
Do
you go.
you know what makes a great shaker? You know those you put it on ice cream. You know those little kind of sprinkles that you put on ice cream? They make great shakers.
Okay. Yes, they literally are called sprinkles.
Yeah, yeah, but the
They
shaker
are,
that they come in the thing,
yeah.
I put half them out and let I use that as a shaker all the time. It's
Yeah, I can imagine that is a good sound. I can see that. I
yeah.
buy into that
Add that.
wholeheartedly.
You could add that to your collection. Just
Yeah, yeah.
random.
I need more.
Yeah, like you need more on that amazing way to probably be great to end the podcast. But
Okay.
man, thank you so much. I could talk for hours, but
Hey,
I,
you're
I
welcome. Yeah, we've got to give the listener a break, and
hey man,
uh,
I'd
uh,
love to do it again sometime if you're
well,
ever
yeah.
down for
If you
that.
want to do it after the next album, you'll be very welcome. So,
Oh, brilliant, man,
just
brilliant,
we'll do that anyway.
great.
But yeah, good to talk to you.
Yeah, Tim, I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much for your
Okay.
time, and really like the record, man. Have a good
Okay.
one.
Thanks
Cheers,
very
brother.
much.
Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.